My Lords, I rise to make my first contribution in this committee, so begin by declaring my position as Vice President of the Local Government Association. And I also must slightly belatedly thank the Bill team for last Wednesday morning's briefing, which was very helpful in trying to come to grips with the complexity of this bill. And there are many people with a great deal more experience than I who are also wrestling with that complexity. I rise chiefly to speak to Amendment 34 in the name of the Noble Lord Wallace of Saltaire, who's just very ably introduced that. And I also just want to mention briefly support for Amendment 33. As the Noble Lord Wallace was speaking, I was thinking of the case study of the Dutch firm Randstad and the disaster of the COVID tutoring, which was a contract let overseas, a very large and important contract that I think the government would now acknowledge went horribly wrong and clearly should never have been let there in the first place. And I think the Noble Lord also referred to the situation of care homes and the issue of financialisation, hedge fund, overseas ownership of care homes is something I've been very concerned about since a brilliant report, which is highly relevant, in 2016 from CRESC, the Centre for Research into Economic and Sociocultural Change, who I think really put that issue on the agenda, but since very much been focused on also by, for example, the Financial Times newspaper. But just particularly to address Amendment 34, I perhaps come to this from a slightly different philosophical position from the Noble Lord Wallace, in that I'd like to get rid of all of that financialised provision and see it all in non-profit hands. I believe that's what's appropriate for this. And I think this amendment is probing to ensure that organisations like local social enterprises, not-for-profit companies and charities are able to apply for contracts. I'd like to go stronger for that. I'd like to very much see a preference for those organisations having many of these contracts. And I think I'm going to anonymise this case study because I haven't had the chance to check with the people concerned. But I think of a number of years ago a case when I saw a local, really excellent local rape crisis service, which had been providing provision in a city for a number of years, and eventually found out a month or so after the new contract was supposed to have started that this contract had been handed to a large national organisation. It was a total mess, and we've seen far too many cases like that, where excellent local provision, which may not be expert at applying for tenders, putting in tender documents, but is expert in providing services, is really swept aside in our current arrangements. And I think there's very general, I mentioned the Financial Times, there's very general agreement across the political spectrum that we need to stop that happening and ensure that good local services, social enterprises, are able to continue and have stability and surety and certainty, and don't need to put so much of their resources into that endless cycle of bidding and bidding and bidding again. So I'm not sure if this amendment exactly gets to where I want to go, but it's certainly, I think, heading in the right direction. So that's really why I wanted to speak in favour of that amendment.